This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I am pleased to introduce you to Joy Jordan Lake. Joy's varied professional experience has included working as a college professor, an author, journalist, waitress, director of a program for homeless families, university chaplain, horseback riding instructor, freelance photographer, and the job title that remains her personal favorite, head sailing instructor. Wow, that is a varied background. She joins me today to talk about her latest novel, A Bend of Light. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Joy.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike. This is fun.
Joy, I've got so many questions for you, but the first I have to ask is, where does your story as an author begin?
You know, I very much in elementary school, I loved the outdoors as a kid, and I was also sick a lot. So I spent a lot of time kind of either in bed reading or up in a tree reading or in somebody's backyard reading. Our moms would, kick us out of the house, go be outdoors. And so we'd either go read somewhere or we would go act out a book we were reading, Nancy Drew or, some classic or whatever. So, and there was this little library across the street from me, this little church library. And the librarian was this little lady who was adorable, and nobody oversaw what she put in that library. So she had like the complete works of the Bronte sisters and all of Charles Dickens and on and on and on. And so I would go over there and just check out books, and nobody was ever there. I would just run across barefoot, check out books and bring them back. And so I had this dream of wanting to be a writer. And it was my fifth grade teacher. I love elementary school teachers. I think they're just the most influential. I'm a part-time college professor, but I think elementary school teachers are really the ones who rock the world. But I'd never told anybody I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. And she left this article one day on my desk, and she'd scribbled herself, "This is for you one day when you grow up to become an author." And I was just bowled over by that. And she actually quietly did that for a lot of different people in a lot of different areas, I've learned since. But anyway, I guess she's kind of marks in my head, or at least that little library running across the street to it, those moments.
Well, most authors are avid readers or were avid readers as kids from a very young age. And that's where a lot of the inspiration comes from. But I'm curious, what were you turning into this teacher who was convinced that you were going to become a writer?
Good question. I know we read a lot in her class, and she read to us a lot. In fifth grade, you're kind of too old to be read to, but we were just all enchanted by her. She was an older woman. She wasn't like cool. She was already quite old at that point. She would read to us after lunch. So, and then I remember we did a lot of creative writing. I don't know why she thought that or what I had written that led her to believe that, but she was just one of those incredibly insightful people. So she must have seen enough hints or something that she felt like she needed to encourage me.
Yeah, it's invaluable to have that kind of encouragement, from such a young age, because it really does help you really think that, hey, maybe I could do this. But when did you actually start, call yourself a writer?
Well, let's see. I was an English major in college, which of course is the road to fame and fortune, as we all know.
That's right.
Right? And so no surprise that after that I was a Pizza Hut waitress. And so I somehow missed the memo that you really should go to med school or become a real estate developer or something. But I guess I did just a little bit of journalism in college for the paper and loved that. And I was a freelance journalist for a while and worked for a newspaper for a while. So in all those ways, I guess sort of thought of myself, or did think of myself as a writer, but really wanted to write books, wanted to write fiction. And I was one of those people who just kind of walked around saying, I'm going to write fiction someday. And just, bills have to be paid, and they're always fun people to hang out with and movies to watch and books to read. And so there comes a point, I guess, I know at one point, the only writers conference I went to, I guess, in my early 20s. I finally paid to go to this writers conference in England, and probably went there for free on, airline points. I think my husband and I had about 50 cents in the bank account. So I'm not sure how we got there, but we kind of backpacked around. But I remember at that point too, thinking it's time to fish or cut bait, as we say in the South. It's time. If I'm going to have this dream, I need to do something about it. So I started working on a collection of short stories, which of course, I knew nothing about marketing. Collections of short stories by unknown authors do not sell, but I did get it published, and that was fun. But I think maybe that was another thing for a very frugal person to be willing to pay to go to England for this writers conference. That was kind of another turning point where, like, I'm gonna have to put some time into, and a little self-discipline for a change, into this dream.
Well, there's that, making that investment in yourself, right? That's important. So that's a big milestone that should not be understated. But
Absolutely.
What was it about the conference? What was your main takeaways from attending that first conference?
It was a guy named Larry Wywady was kind of the writer in residence for that conference, and I remember we all read something we had brought, and we had turned it in early, I guess. And then we read it aloud to the class, and people made comments and all. And I think I went maybe last, but my memory was people had lots of very kind, encouraging comments to make, and he just kept hammering at it. And finally, and I noticed two things. One is I can be really thin-skinned in some areas of my life, but in that area, in writing, I'm not. I really want to know how to make it better. It's like having a good coach, like, bring it on, tell me how to be better. So I noticed that about myself, even in the moment, like, okay, I want to know this, and I'm not being thin-skinned. This is good. But I also noticed then a couple of other students or workshop participants spoke up and said, why are you being so hard on her? And so much harder than the rest of us. And he kind of rocked back in his chair, and he said, well, like this was a stupid question. He said, because I appreciate what she's done. And it was really oddly one of the most affirming moments I've had. And he even took me aside later and said, I hope I didn't beat up on you too badly, but I really think this has potential. And that piece that I had read ended up becoming one of the short stories in my first book. And but that was oddly a very affirming moment, when he just wouldn't leave me alone. He just kept after me.
Yeah, no, that's it's a compliment, really.
Right.
For spending that much time and attention on you. But being thin-skinned and being an author do not go hand in hand.
Oh, isn't that the truth? Oh my gosh.
You make yourself so vulnerable in the writing process, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. That you have to be vulnerable about it, because you put your soul on every page. And there's going to be critics. Your editors are going to hammer you a little bit
Right.
to make you a better writer. And then, of course, critics and fans and readers, they're all going to have something to say on Goodreads or Amazon or wherever people go and do their reviews. It's you can't be I like to say, you can't be thin-skinned, and you can't be too humble either, because at some point you have to promote the hell out of something, and you wrote it for a reason. You feel it's good enough. So
Right. It's such an interesting dance. I'm teaching a creative writing class at Belmont University right now, and I was just talking about that yesterday with my students. Sort of, I think, at least in my experience, most writers are not very egotistical. And in fact, they tend to skew a little more insecure and quiet, and more the reader type. But you have to have some kind of steely sense inside of you of, there's something here. It may not be good enough yet, but I have what it takes to make it better. If not wonderful, at least I can stick with it and make it better. There's got to be some kind of very stubborn. My dad, I think my biggest flaw as a child growing up, my dad used to get so frustrated with me and say, you are so stubborn. And I remember one day shaking his head and saying, maybe all this stubbornness will come in handy someday when you're grown up. But, I think he was just despairing of me as a child. But in fact, certainly as a writer, even some days when I'm really lacking self-confidence, that stubbornness will sometimes be the thing that gets me through. It's like, I'm not giving up on this thing. I'm going to keep at it until it's decent. So
Yeah. Well, that, and, you spend 75, 80,000 words, right, for an average novel, usually hand in a lot more until other people who know more of what readers want, decide to cut
right.
some out. But you have to stand behind it though at some point, and you're right. I mean, authors are, maybe a little bit more introverted at times. Definitely all suffer from imposter syndrome. I don't care who you are, you suffer from imposter syndrome. And you got to get over it because you have to believe in it so much because, you want somebody more than your friends or family to buy
Right.
your
Exactly.
ultimate work, right? So
Exactly.
gotta
That's
stand behind
everybody's
it.
fear. Right.
Yeah.
The 3 books that you fear are going to be the 3 books that sell.
Yeah. You mentioned being sick as a kid. What was that all about? What was what got you ill?
I think it was just, it was just all ear, nose, throat stuff, allergies, whatever, who knows? I loved animals. I was always had cats and dogs, and that it was just all that kind of strep throat constantly. And the truth is, I don't know if I've ever admitted this to my dear mother, but the truth is, it didn't take much for me to want to stay home because I knew I could just read all day and then catch up later, on school. So the slightest little tickle of the throat or the slightest, I genuinely had a lot of earaches, but it didn't take much for me to go, oh, I think, golly, mom, I think
Yeah.
I'm just miserable. So some of it was genuine and some of it was, why would you not want to just stay home and read?
Right. Right.
So,
There it is. Blaming reading again.
right, exactly.
Well, after that conference and you're putting that book of short stories together, which of course, made you 7 figures. How did you go about finding an agent and getting it published?
Oh gosh, I love that Anne Lamott. I'm just rereading Bird by Bird for the sake of my students. They're reading it right now, and I'm just dying laughing over Anne Lamott's advice about, she gives all this deep, this profound advice about writing and the writing life, and then talks about her students saying, but how do I get an agent? All that kind of I jumped the gun just like that way too soon. I literally thought, I guess I had 0 books published at this point. I'd done all these short stories, but they weren't published except in like random magazines, but not together in a book. And I had this great idea. I was supposed to be working on my PhD at Tufts University in Boston. And I ran across this really interesting stuff in the 19th century, connections between Boston and Charleston, South Carolina. And I was much more interested in that and writing a novel about that than I was working on my dissertation. So I decided, I had spring break, and I figured I had about 3 months before my dissertation advisor noticed that I was kind of gone AWOL and wasn't working on my dissertation. So I gave myself 3 months, mapped it out, how many pages would I need to write a day. No, I'd never written a novel in my life, only short stories at that point. Why I thought I could write a novel in 3 months. And so I had it mapped out, went to had a plan to go to Charleston with my husband and my then baby, I think she was 9 months at the time, and do all the research I needed to do, come back, write this novel. And and then for an agent, my husband went to Harvard and was roommates with a guy who was working in New York, who had been to a cocktail party with one of the top agents in New York.
Wow.
And working for Sterling Lord Litteristic. So I thought, in my very naive writer brain, I thought, oh my gosh, that's perfect. Okay, my husband's roommate went to a cocktail party where he met this guy named Peter Mattson. And I bet the famous Peter Mattson would love to take on an unknown writer who has just pounded out a novel in 3 months. And so, the stupid things you do, right? And sure enough, sent it to him. He actually, I think, wrote a very nice note back, a personal note, but like, thank you very much, but no. And I proceeded to send it out literally so many times. I had this long, spreadsheet or a list of, it felt like every agent in New York I had sent it to in my naive way, and actually got a rejection letter from an agent I never sent to. So that's what that was about, right? I don't know if it's like a proactive, just in case.
They just wanted to build up your ego, or make sure that you didn't get too big for your britches, right?
Right.
Proactively
Oh
sending you rejection letters.
Exactly. Since everyone else in New York has gotten one, I thought I'd better send you one. So before you send me your manuscript, let me just go ahead and reject you ahead of time. I mean, it was awful. So I just, I can't, again, the stubbornness, less than the ego, but certainly the stubbornness. I just kept working at it and learning. The ones who did take the time to write anything personal took that very seriously and worked on stuff, and went away and wrote other books, got this collection of short stories published, and did other things. And it was actually many years later, had a friend of mine was an agent for a while, but he was actually a better editor than agent. He went back to editing. And anyway, that finally ended up with Elizabeth Weed at the book group. But she wasn't my first agent, but she is dynamite. She and 3 friends of hers run the book group together, and they're just, they're hitting it out of the park. So she's been fabulous to work with. But I try to tell people who are just getting started, like, it's okay if you don't have your dream agent right out of the chute.
Yeah.
It's okay.
That's where that thin skin will come to haunt you, right? If because you could, many people can just, and I'm one of them, wallpaper their wall with rejection letters from agencies.
Oh yeah,
many of which do not take the time to write a very personal note for you.
Right. So you have no idea. Are they just too full and too busy? Or did they, right. Did some college intern read it and reject it? Did they even see it? Who knows? Right.
Well, what can you tell us about A Bend of Light?
Well, it's set in a coastal Maine village in 1950. I really wanted that kind of closed feeling of, like you get from a Louise Penny novel of just, we have just these characters here and someone did it. But I really love more than the whodunit. I love the why done it, the psychology behind what makes people tick, what makes people want to get revenge or hold a grudge or hate or all those kind of things. So, and I was intrigued by 1950. There's so many fabulous World War II novels right now, just so many. But I was kind of intrigued by, first of all, I didn't want to set it in an era where you could just do a DNA test or you could search there's one character who's been missing for years, and I didn't want anybody to be able to just do an internet search and things like that. I wanted to get away from that and do more of kind of the classic golden era mystery. And I was intrigued with kind of that post-war sense of, you have, on the one hand, you have the sense of jubilation that the war is over. And on the other hand, you have this sort of impending sense of doom about the Cold War. And you have also just the culture has shifted so fast. And you have women who've, some of them really loved what they were getting to do during the war. Suddenly, they've lost their jobs or they've lost their role or whatever. Things have shifted with roles in terms of gender. You've got all kinds of things going on racially. And we think of the 60s has been when everything kind of broke loose. And but really, you've got it right there in the 50s. It's just starting to kind of come to the surface. So I was just intrigued by those kind of the social currents that are going on. And again, that sort of sense of tension, right? We all know that you need tension in the stories, and you've got, so the main character is someone who she was a photographic interpreter during World War II, which was a role I didn't even know anything about till I started researching, and was fascinated that these people would have to take pictures from the reconnaissance airplanes that would fly over enemy territory. And then they would not only have to analyze what they were seeing, but they would have to compare it sort of day to day or week to week, so that if suddenly there are a bunch of trees in a picture that weren't there yesterday, obviously a forest didn't grow up overnight. So they knew that somehow this was camouflage and something was being built there. And, to me, it was just fascinating. But that was her job during the war. And she's lost her job with the returning GIs. And so she's trying to sort of remake her life back in the little town where she grew up. And she's a photographer. So anyway, they're a lot of fun. Have you spent much time in Maine? I know you're not.
I haven't. We used to go to Cape Cod every summer. But we never made it so far to Maine. I think just the drive was just it is that much farther.
Right. Sure.
To get to. But no, it's on our bucket list. Been to Vermont, but not so much Maine.
Okay, well, you'll have to add it. I when we lived in Boston, we would go up to kind of the southern coast of Maine whenever we could. It was just about an hour and a half. So you could even do a day trip. And back when we had the 50 cents in our bank account, you could just do a day trip, not even have to spend the night. And so I love that whole Kennebunkport area, York. And so that this little town, it's a fictional town that I created, Pelican Cove, but anybody who's ever been to Kennebunkport would recognize it immediately as set up like Kennebunkport. And then just, and some of the landmarks are similar, but anyway, that was fun to create. In fact, the publisher included a beautiful map of the village. So that's the first novel I've written with a map in it. Ooh. I'm very excited.
that means there are locations of interest.
That's right. Absolutely.
In addition to people of interest.
Exactly. Right.
Well, it's also an interesting time period to write about too, because it's, it's post-war. There's still, a lot of racial inequalities in America during that time, but there's also like this sense of hope, among, American people, like the economy starts doing well. But it sounds like not everything goes well in your story, that there's some kind of a,
right.
Maybe some,
right.
kind, of, some kind of bad stuff happens.
Right. And some good stuff too. But, there are a lot of funny moments, I hope, for the reader. I love that about Louise Penny's novels. I'm a big fan of hers, where you've got a lot of lighthearted moments in the midst of, trying to track down some pretty dark stuff. But that I think there again, I was intrigued with, I didn't realize there were 80,000 soldiers missing in action after World War II. So you've got that. So one of the, or several of the characters are missing, one of these people who grew up in the town, who's been very close to them and wondering if he's still alive. So that's part of the early part of the novel, looking for him. And so there's that, the people whose lives didn't just get back to, oh, good, and you've got, as you say, you've got a lot of racial inequality. One of the characters is from Jamaica. I didn't realize that a number of people from the Caribbean came up during World War II to work in New England and upstate New York on farms. So many of the men had gone to war. And so anyway, things like that. And any village, I grew up in a small town, and any village or small town can be very warm and wonderful and welcoming. And then they can also, I know the one I grew up in, can have these very dark currents, and very things happening that are pretty scary behind the scenes. So
absolutely. Well, it sounds like an intriguing read. I know we can't talk too much about it because we don't want to give anything away, or you don't want to give anything away. But I want to continue our conversation, getting to know you a little bit more. And one way I do that is through a series of questions, starting with some around pop culture. So I'm curious, Joy, when you were growing up, what were some of your favorite TV shows?
Let's see, growing up. Let's see, Gilligan's Island. This is going to be very embarrassing because none of them are going to be like, things that people of taste would have watched. I guess Gilligan's Island. And
Gilligan's Island comes up
a
lot on this program. Absolutely. Okay, absolutely. Yes.
All right.
Ask Gilligan, favorite, what character do you identify most with on Gilligan's Island?
I think probably Mary Ann.
Oh,
definitely not Ginger. I'm thinking
not
maybe
Ginger,
because she always seemed like, she always seemed like the smart one that wasn't the movie star, that was sort of underrated.
Oh, I agree. Between a lot of men are asked, Ginger or Mary Ann. I was always team Mary Ann. Always.
Oh, good for you.
Always liked Mary Ann. Yes. No, I'm. Even though she didn't have blonde hair. No, she was my favorite. I say for myself, I'm either Thurston Howell III.
Oh, that's great.
Because he always slept with a teddy bear, and I did for a very long time after childhood.
That
he had his little tiny. He always called his wife Lovey. To the point where I don't even know what Mrs. Howell's name is. She's just always Lovey.
Good point. She was Lovey. I had forgotten that about his teddy bear. That's sweet. My middle child was kind of a Thurston Howard, or is still is. Don't tell him I said so. But he's just one of those kids that always was the person who was invited to the, brunch at the toniest country club in town. We never knew how, why is it always you? What is it about the rest of us that are, and he always, even as a kid, he was a rough, tough, athlete and yet he had this sense of he appreciated things like crystal and sterling silver and things like that, or how something should look, or I was like, what is that about? So yeah, he had what we would tease him about being the Thurston Howell, and he slept with a teddy bear until he was about, 12. Okay. And so there you go.
There it is. There it is. So in addition to Gilligan's Island, what else you got?
Oh, let's see. Loved Get Smart. I still sometimes think of those steel doors, kind of, those people who have personalities where they just choose not to think about something, and I still picture in my mind, that steel door coming down, or, okay, I guess we're not going to talk about that. And what else do I even remember? I loved Wonderful World of Disney. Mm-hmm. Just loved it. But I grew up in small town and was expected to go to church on Sunday nights. And that was always a bone of contention with my parents, because I always wanted to stay home and watch Wonderful World of Disney. So this was, this was always something to be feeling rebellious about, clearly.
Yeah.
Unless there was an old-fashioned ice cream churn at the church, in which case that was, then I could be lured to church.
Ice cream beats Mickey Mouse.
Right, exactly.
How about musical artists? Who were you listening to growing up?
Oh gosh, I loved, the Bee Gees, and had a huge crush on Bobby Sherman, not for his music, but because he was cute. And again, nothing sophisticated, nothing cool. Just loved the kind of I loved Earth, Wind and Fire. I guess that's kind of more cool, isn't it?
Sure.
Yeah, Doobie Brothers. My brother and I went in together, and our first record we bought together was a Doobie Brothers album. We were very proud of that. Oh, and Peter Frampton. He lived here, actually not far from where I do, in Brentwood, Tennessee. And I had a big crush on Peter Frampton. Had that great hair.
Oh, he doesn't have it anymore.
He does not. I was so disillusioned when I saw him come out on stage the other day. I was just a few rows back, and it was like, oh, Peter.
Yeah, I saw him. He came to my town maybe about 10 years ago. And he sounded amazing. Great show. I know he's got some health issues now, or he's retiring, or something to do with his hands, or some musculoskeletal thing or something. That's what I heard. He was on Howard Stern a couple of years ago talking about it. But he used to live near one of my former bosses in Ohio.
No kidding.
Outside of Cincinnati. Yeah. He was a Cincinnati guy for a bit. Wow. Yeah, I love Peter Frampton. Love the Doobies. Bee Gees too. Love the Bee Gees.
Yeah.
My wife and I got into an argument actually recently. She thought Andy Gibb was one of the Bee Gees, and I said no, he was not. And she's like, he's a Gibb. I said, yes, he's a Gibb. He is one of the brothers Gibb, but he was never in the Bee Gees. And I made her go on Wikipedia to look it up.
Okay. And were you right?
Oh, I was right.
Okay. Well, I hate not to side with another woman, but I was kind of leaning toward you were probably right on that one.
Yeah, well, it was Maurice, right? Barry, and oh God, who was the third? Maurice, Barry, not Andy. I know it's not Andy.
That's all we know.
Shit, I hope it's not Andy. Can't go wrong with the Bee Gees, though. Love it. Who do you like now? Do you listen to anybody now? Anything more contemporary?
Well, let's hope my taste has been a little bit updated. I hesitate to name too many people, because in Nashville, so like you've just heard. So one thing I love about living here, I have to say, is you often hear the backstory to songs. What's the God Bless the Broken Road?
Oh yeah.
Rascal Flatts.
Yeah.
Well, the guy who wrote that, or one of the guys who wrote that, is kind of friend loosely, acquaintance / friend. His wife does amazing things here in town, and he's super, super talented guy. But I was in a group socially one time where he was telling the story of, he was at a bar hanging out, and with a couple of other guys, and one of them asked the other one about, how's life treating you? He'd really struggled with alcoholism, and he said, I just really, yeah, I'm, better. I'm on the wagon. I've, that marriage completely dissolved and crashed and burned. It was awful. And, but I'm getting married again, and it's beautiful, and kind of started my life over and learned a lot from everything I did wrong and all the people I hurt. And all I can tell you is, God bless the broken road. And the other two guys were songwriters and they said there was just silence for a minute, and they both said, can we use that? So turned it into a song. And, you hear these just great stories of where the stories came from. So I love, what I really love are like the, what do we call them? Kind of beach country, island country, I guess is the name.
Yeah.
So, and I love, like Bob Marley. And so I always laugh at my kind of very odd eclectic taste in music, because and I love anybody who's fun in person, like a Garth Brooks or Trisha Yearwood. They're super humble when you hear them speak in person, and funny. And so that always makes me like someone's music.
Yeah. They did a great show during the pandemic. It was just basically the two of them acoustically in his home studio. Should have said their home studio, like just taking requests. It was really cool. Like it was really neat.
They are really genuinely neat people. Like Garth Brooks, I guess Trisha Yearwood graduated from Belmont, so she comes back a good bit to do things. And he's done a number of things just with students, kind of answering their questions and trying to be encouraging. And, and you hear from people who are on their cruise, like traveling on their cruise, roadies, is that what they're called?
Yeah.
They are genuinely kind people,
Yeah.
which is just cool to hear, because people at that level, I'm sure get exhausted and impatient and,
Yeah. I mean, speaking of island country, my wife and I just saw Kenny Chesney a couple weeks ago.
Oh, fun.
That was it's a fantastic show.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, let's talk about your inner child. Do you feel like you have an inner child? And if so, how do you feed your inner child?
Oh, absolutely, inner child. And I think sort of writers, I don't know, maybe sometimes you talk to writers who don't, but I would think you'd almost have to, because so much of, what Flannery O'Connor says about anyone who survived childhood has enough material to write for the rest of your life. And you really do, I guess I feel like I'm more in touch with my inner child than I have been in earlier times in my life when I was trying to do other things, because now I'm doing the things that I always wanted to do when I was a kid. I wanted to write, and I wanted to have time to be in nature, and I wanted, to have time to prioritize people. And I talk like I'm not stressed out right now, which of course I am right before a book launch, but I guess I do feel more like I'm appreciating the things that, that I loved, and the things I didn't want to have anything to do with, the things I learned as a kid about myself and about the world. So, yeah.
Maybe on related lines, in what ways do you look towards writing as a form of therapy?
Oh, totally. For me, it is. My first novel is one called Blue Hole Back Home. And it was, I think, partly from living in New England and going to graduate school at Tufts. I would talk about the South like it was all this, and none of my other colleagues in grad school were from the South. And I would talk about it like it was this land of just, beauty and racial harmony, and everyone was holding hands, singing "We Are the World" and eating good barbecue and, great music. And they all had this sort of TV Hollywood, circa 1950 view of the South, that it was all sort of, or worse, it was all Bull O'Connor, and it was all, really, really scary fire hoses and German shepherds. And so clearly, their view needed updated and my view needed complexifying more. But while I was there, I remember one time we were talking about things from our past, and I mentioned, kind of alluded to this time in my life when I'd been out swimming with my parents and coming back from a swimming hole, and I was in the back of the car, and there was this roadblock, and all these guys in white hoods and sheets walk out, and they tapped on the driver's side window with the butt of a rifle and made my dad roll it down and stuck the rifle inside the car where I was sitting in the back seat and my mom was in the passenger seat, and held out a Kentucky Fried Chicken bucket and said, "Would you like to donate?" And you know, I guess it wasn't like that was usual in my town,
Yeah.
but the fact that I'm of a certain age, that not incredibly ancient, to have run in with a Klan, and have this distinct memory of my dad essentially saying, I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was a boiled down to hell no. And then they began to rock the car so hard that my mom thought we were going to die, not by being shot, but by being the car just rocking so hard it felt like it was going to flip over. And anyway, I'm telling this story, and these people who are, you know, essentially my age, what the heck? And like, what happened to this land of, you know, we are the world and everybody holding hands? And I guess it made me just begin to think more deeply about, okay, I, in my mind, had created this warm, wonderful little town where I grew up, which in many ways it truly was some of the kindest people you'd ever meet in your life. And yet there was this active Klan chapter on the back of the mountain, and just trying to put that together, without having to pay $180 an hour for therapy. I just, you know, and so Blue Hole Back Home came out of that. It was first a short story that got published in my first book collection, and then it was later turned into a novel because some kind reviewer somewhere mentioned that in her review, like, she should really turn this into a novel. And so, but I mean, that novel was total therapy because much of it is it's fictionalized, but it's kind of, it was trying to put together this young woman from Sri Lanka moved to our little town, and she and I became friends, and she was very dark skinned. She was of Moorish descent, and so she was gorgeous and dark skinned, and the Klan again reappeared and was awful to their family, and they had a rock thrown through their plate glass window, their living room window, and they were threatened, and it was horrible, and cross burned in their front yard. And
oh my gosh.
And before that on their last day in town, she and I stood out front of her house, and both of us crying, and we were both about 16, and she said, "My father told me if we moved from Sri Lanka, where we were persecuted for being Muslim, if we moved here, this is the land of opportunity where everyone's welcome. This is the end of the rainbow. What happened? Like, this is America. I was told one thing about what this would be, and what happened?" And I remember just standing there crying at 16 and thinking, and I think I began to talk. I have no idea what I said, but I could see on her face that it was completely inadequate. Everything that I was saying, and the truth was, I had no idea that this sweet little town that had always been so kind to me had been so horrible to her family. And so that's really where this book came from, was just my trying to figure that out for myself. It was clearly I should have gotten therapy instead. Many sessions.
Did you ever keep in touch with her? You know where she wound up?
You know, I've tried to track her down for years. In fact, I used her real name in writing the book. And at the last minute, I checked in with my editor and said, "By the way, I'm using her real name. Is that okay?" And he was like, "No, that's not okay."
Not a good idea.
We had to find an appropriate name that had also a beautiful sound that was, you know, could be Sri Lankan and a young woman who was Muslim. And but every time I tell the story to book clubs, I've often used her real name, and I've had several people who are into kind of like family searches and things like that help look for her. And I think we've gotten close. The last I heard, her family's last name was Hanifa. There were some Hanifas living outside DC, and I tried to track down some of those to see if I should really try again, since of course the internet gets more you know, you can do more with it every year. So I should try again, but I've tried many times over the years. I'd love to find her again.
Which kind of brings us full circle, because you could not do that in 1950, where A Bend of Light takes place.
Right. That's exactly right.
Last question for you. If you could, whisper some words of advice to your younger self, maybe, it's the young woman who was skipping school to read books. What words of advice would you give her?
Keep skipping school for one thing. Keep reading. And then maybe don't build quite so many safety nets under yourself. I did, as you read out this embarrassing long list of jobs I had held. And I still tend to do that. I love teaching, so I tend to go back to teaching, but that does take time away from writing. But certainly my younger self, my young adult self, did so many other things. And I don't really regret doing any of those because they enrich life and I learned a lot. But I think part of that was just maybe I was scared to fail, that if I really tried hard as a writer, I'd have to face the fact that I might fail on the thing I cared about most, or the professional thing I cared about most. That if I really took away all the safety nets and just leapt, what if I failed at the big dream? And that's a silly way to live. I guess I wish I'd taken writing more seriously earlier, which is easy to say because we all do need to pay bills, right? So,
Well, I'd say the flip side of that though is, working as a waitress, for example, you learn so much about the human condition. And there's so much like fertile ground for stories. You may have had so many seeds planted in your mind, back through all those different jobs. That only came to bloom, later in life. And you use that as fodder for your creative writing, your novels, your storylines, your characters, you name it.
yes, I think you're right. And thank you. That is encouraging to be absolved of all that. And fortunately, as you and I know, it is a career where you can at least ideally keep going for a long, long time. Reese Bowen is a writer who shares an editor with me, and I love reading her work. And I think she's in her 80s maybe, and just going strong from what I hear. So anyway, those kind of people are my heroes. I want to just keep trying to improve till I drop. So thank goodness, I love not being like a figure skater or something where the career's done at about 16, right? Maybe 22.
Yeah, maybe. Well, Joy, this has been a fun conversation. I imagine some people listening to this may want to get in touch with you, follow you on social media. Do you have any social media handles you want to throw out there, or a website?
Sure. Joy Jordan Lake is Twitter and Instagram. I guess on Instagram it's Joy Jordan Lake _books. But I love to connect with readers, and Joy Jordan Lake, I have an author page. And then my website is The Woman Who Built It. It's really fun and interactive and lots of timelines and fun stuff. And that's just joyjordanlake.com. But thanks, Mike. This has been so much fun. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Oh, you're welcome. And all the best with A Bend of Light.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.